You know, as an analyst, you spend your days staring at charts and data. And after a while, you start to see these patterns emerge. I noticed this fundamental difference in how entire industries were growing, really a deep split between the East and the West. It wasn't just about business strategy, it felt like a totally different philosophy for how you win.
See, in the West, we're so used to this idea of a solo marathon. One company, like an Intel or a Microsoft, runs the long race, innovates, and eventually emerges as the champion. But when I looked at China, it was something else entirely. It was like a chaotic, all-out sprint with dozens of companies just flooding the market. And then the government would almost seem to pick the winner mid-race. I just had to figure out why. What was driving this?
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll dive deep into China's high-speed model. Then we'll contrast that with America's more walled-off approach. After that, we'll look at the forces fueling each of them. And finally, we'll unpack what I think is the ultimate trade-off here for the future of tech.
So I started calling China's strategy the open source model. Now, hold on, this has nothing to do with software code. I'm talking about a national industrial strategy, one that shares just enough technology and advantage to let an entire sector mature at this absolutely blistering pace.
It's a really fascinating concept, right? You basically let 1,000 flowers bloom in this super competitive garden. Then you just watch and see which ones grow the strongest. And then you pour all the water and sunlight, all the resources, into helping those few grow into global giants. Let me walk you through the 5 stages I started to see over and over again. And this process, which looks like total chaos from the outside, is actually a playbook, a 5-step playbook. It starts with initial openness. You lower the barriers and let everyone in. That creates massive competition, which is brutal, but it forces prices down and innovation up. Then, once the top contenders emerge, the state steps in to fuel them to critical mass. They crown their champions, and then they unleash them for global dominance.
And if you want to see this playbook in action, you don't have to look any further than the solar industry. Seriously, it was one of the first and clearest examples of just how powerful this strategy could be.
Think back to the mid-2000s. All of a sudden, dozens of Chinese solar firms just flooded the market. A lot of them were imitating existing technology, sure, but they were scaling production at a speed the world had just never seen before. And out of that chaos, champions like Jinko Solar and Trina Solar emerged, backed by huge state subsidies. In less than a decade, they went on to completely dominate global manufacturing.
Now, you might be thinking, okay, but that was a one-off. Nope, this wasn't a fluke. The exact same playbook is now being run for electric vehicles, and honestly, the timeline is compressing even further. It's happening even faster.
The EV space is the perfect modern example. You had this absolute explosion of companies, BYD, NIO, XPeng, all duking it out in that massive competition phase. Then, the state started to select its champions. CATL was clearly back to dominate the most critical component, the battery. Meanwhile, BYD, with its incredible mastery of manufacturing, was chosen to be the global automotive powerhouse.
Okay, now let's shift gears completely, because this is a world away from the model I grew up analyzing in the US, a strategy I call the walled garden, or the proprietary playbook.
Let's look at how this walled garden builds a different kind of power. The classic example is Intel. They didn't start some chaotic race. Nope. Instead, they spent years, pretty much in secret, developing the x86 processor. And once they had that breakthrough, they built a fortress of patents around it, creating this deep technological moat that let them dominate the market for decades. And this club is just legendary, right? You've got Microsoft with Windows, Apple with its iOS ecosystem, Adobe with the Creative Suite. The playbook here is so consistent. Invest a ton of money in deep R&D to create a unique, protected technology first. This leads to insanely high profits for sure, but it can also mean a much slower path to mass adoption.
So you have these two models that are almost polar opposites. What's actually fueling these two different engines? What makes them work so well in their own contexts? Now, this is what I find so fascinating. This isn't just about business competition. It's a fundamental clash of philosophies. On one side, you've got state-directed goals using a massive domestic market as an incubator. And on the other, you have market-driven innovation funded by venture capital and fiercely protected by intellectual property laws.
So here's the crucial point, the trade-off. China's model gives people all over the world access to new tech incredibly fast and cheap. But it can create these brutal winner-take-all markets.
The US model, on the other hand, fosters world-changing R&D and these really profitable ecosystems. But its slower pace and higher prices can leave those markets vulnerable to faster, cheaper competitors.
When you really strip away all the complexity and you boil it all down, the single biggest difference between these two world-changing strategies, it really just comes down to one critical factor.
It's all about speed. It's about compressing time. China's entire approach is engineered to take an industry from infancy to global maturity in just a handful of years, a process that might take decades in the walled garden model. They are fundamentally playing different games on completely different timelines.
And that leaves us with a critical question for the 21st century. In this global race to define the future of technology, what ultimately wins? Is it the patient marathon runner, meticulously building an unbreachable lead over decades? Or is it the explosive sprinter, the one who's capable of overwhelming the entire field in a single, decisive burst? The answer isn't just going to determine who leads, it's going to determine what kind of innovation we all get to experience.